It can be a weekly tug-of-war that pops up every 7 days. Your kid doesn't want to go to church. You know, the research supports this parenting sore spot. In recent years, the Pew Research Center has found that American teens are less likely than their parents to identify with the religion. So while 1 in 4 parents might say they are religiously unaffiliated, it's 1 in every 3 teens, so you can see the struggle. If you are a religious parent and you're discovering your kid may have different beliefs, it can be a tricky and a tender spot for your family. We acknowledge that. Studio 5 parenting contributor Heather Johnson is sharing how to respond if this situation arises. This can be tricky, this can be tender, and I think it's a very relatable situation for so many parents. Can we establish what age group we're talking about? Because my 5-year-old doesn't want to go to the dentist, my 7-year-old doesn't want to go to school. I make them do those things because I think they're good for them. Are we talking older kids, I assume?
We are. We're talking older kids, right? As we kind of get into those preteen and those teenage years. We're talking about kids who don't want to go to church, but also who don't want to subscribe to the same religion. This is very painful. If you've been in this situation, if you know anyone and have been close to someone who is, it's just like a gut punch in so many ways, especially because religion tends to be tied to some sort of eternal perspective. And that idea that what we do on earth does have eternal consequences.
It matters.
It matters. And so when we watch our children go different than maybe we subscribe to, it is really, really hard to know how to navigate this.
Yeah,
it's hard.
It tugs at the heart in the most painful way.
It does.
And I appreciate you acknowledging that. I know parents will as well. Let's jump in. You have some great advice. You have a lot of advice. I want to get through as much as we can. You say first and foremost, parents need to put the relationship first.
We're always going to do that. Now, we're going to do that no matter the situation. But remember, I mean, as parents, we have a hard time when our children, for example, don't want to play the same sport we played in high school, or when they want to go to a different college than we graduated from, let alone this really tender spot where they're going against or maybe making decisions that might tend to go against in the long run. Believe. And so we have to know that if the relationship comes first, everything else has room. But if there isn't a relationship, nothing has room. Nothing. So all of our energy has to go to that relationship. The number one thing that gets in the way of that loving relationship is when we make their decisions mean something about us. So when they decide they don't want to go to church, all of a sudden we let that decide that we're not good enough. We didn't do a long enough scripture study, or that we didn't teach something right, or that we weren't devoted enough, we make it about us, or that they're trying to hurt our feelings or be defiant. We want to not make it about us and focus on offering love and kindness and a listening ear. If we'll go that route, if the relationship is a foundation, it can support anything over time, anything. But if we don't have a relationship, there is no foundation of support.
It's interesting how often we've heard you say those words. It's not about you, parents. It's not about you. This seems like, I would say, the strongest example of a time when that would be hard. Not to really apply that and look back, like you said, in the rearview mirror at what I didn't do, what I could have done better. That would be hard.
It is really hard. And we have to know that making it about us will not build a relationship. And so that's why it's so key. Whether we did it right or not, it's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
We have to make sure that that relationship comes first. And our goal is not to focus on getting them back to church or back to our religion. We have to know at the same time, though, that research continues to show that if you focus on a relationship, you actually have a better shot of them ever considering those things again. And that is something to take into consideration. That's not our goal, but that's important to know. Relationships move mountains. The other thing we tend to do is we tend to catastrophize really quick. We all of a sudden have a teenager who says, I don't want to go to church for a couple weeks, and we then decide that that means that they're going to do every terrible, promiscuous thing that we could ever dream of as a parent. We turn it into a catastrophe really, really fast, with the biggest one being that if they don't go for 3 weeks, they'll never, ever go again. And we have to make sure that we don't make everything into a catastrophe so quickly.
Yet habits are forming. So if a child doesn't go 3 weeks in a row, it's going to be easier for them to not go the 4th week and the 5th week. Is that fair to say?
It is. Those things can happen. That can be true. But when we catastrophize things, we then are treating the catastrophes. And so now my conversations, my concerns, my worries are all about these things that haven't happened yet, which is going to hurt a relationship and that child's ability to actually ever listen or care to think about it again.
Circling back to point 1.
It is. It's back to that relationship. The other thing that hurts us so much that we want to get really straight right away as parents is we want to make sure that we understand the difference between a culture and tradition and the doctrine. And we get these things mixed up very quickly when religion is a part of our lives. We often think that culture, for example, maybe men's and women's roles if you're religious, or coming home or not coming home at a certain point in time if you're serving a mission for your church, or perfection. The culture of a religion teaches that you have to be perfect, and if you're not, you're worth less. That is not actually doctrine. That's not doctrine. Although the doctrine might teach a pursuit for perfection, it's made very clear that on earth, that's not something that we're going to obtain. Tradition, such as staying in Sunday clothes all day long, we hear that often. And so we have that fight with our kids over tradition, but that's not doctrine. So we misplace our energy and we get caught up and worried with our kids, our teenagers, oftentimes about culture and tradition when we should actually just be worried about the doctrine of it.
So save your energy for what matters most.
And separate those. We need to untether the culture from the doctrine. They don't always match up. They're not always the same. Now, when they are, great. But oftentimes they're two different things. So at that point, we want to do a couple of things. We want to make sure that we're listening much more than we lecture. This is not a time when we try to change their mind, convince them that we know a right way. Lectures will not build relationships. Listening leads to understanding, and understanding builds relationships. We also want to make sure that there's very gentle encouragement, and gentle is the key word there. This doesn't mean that we abandon ever inviting them. It doesn't mean that we abandon encouraging them, but we don't attach it to any shame. We don't put on them ultimatums, if you don't, then I won't. There isn't anything in that that's going to build a relationship for them to be open-minded.
I'm going to ask the question that I feel like I shouldn't ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway. At any point, do you withdraw like privilege? At any point or at any stage or age, are you saying if you don't go to church, then?
Yeah, it's pretty tricky, right, when we put our kids in that position.
Do you hate that I asked that? I'm sorry.
Well, we want every family to obviously take into consideration their own situation.
Sure.
But if you put yourself in that situation and you're looking to keep a relationship, that isn't going to open their minds to listening or understanding.
Okay.
It's also going to turn them further away from the exact thing that we're hoping one day they might want interest in again.
So back to the gentleness or the relaxed encouragement.
It is always encourage, always invite. Don't shy away from living it yourself. And at the same time, let them know that there is no shame, meaning you won't think of them less of a person.
Of course.
And you will continue to love them regardless of if they take you up on your invitation or don't. And again, each family is unique, but we want that to underlie everything so that each family can make best decisions.
You say this is a great opportunity to walk alongside your child, which I could point to some really beautiful children's primary songs and hymns that say those very same words, but to treat this as a joint learning opportunity.
It is, and we see it sometimes, if we're not careful, as a I lecture to you opportunity. Let me convince you, let me show you all the ways in my life it's been a blessing, or in the future it will be.
Yeah.
This is a time where we need to be listening and learning with them and alongside them and also from them. It's okay for you to study and learn with your child and both of you come up with a different outcome, right? Remember, if the relationship is in place, everything else can be supported over time, everything. But if we abandon that, there isn't any foundation for anything to be supported. And from there, we have to practice what we preach.
Which again, Heather, can I say, we sit here weekly and we're so grateful for the chance to learn from you. And very often we say, it starts with me, look in the mirror. But you take those basic foundational phrases and practices that you're so wise in teaching us continuously, and you apply it to something big like this, and suddenly you get it. It makes sense why that I'm going to practice what I preach and let my example shine strong.
It's exactly right. And especially when it comes to religion that is so founded in these values and these principles, if we're not actually demonstrating those values and principles to our children when they choose different or have a different opinion or different than we are moving forward, we are not practicing what we preach. And it is very hard if we're ultimating them, if that's a word, and if we're, forcing and shaming and blaming them, to then step back and say, oh, but this religion that I subscribe to doesn't do any of those things, but I do them to you. So that acceptance, that loving, that kindness over the ultimatums, over the force, the relationship is what moves mountains. Put our focus there. And again, it's not a solid, this will solve it. We're not looking for that.
Sure.
We're looking to build that relationship so that there's always room for this religion that we love to be entertained, always. And relationships do it.
Very wise advice, and you reflect the tenderness of so many parents I know in this tricky and tender situation. So thank you, Heather. We appreciate it.